Oh, no, it is one. Okay. Yeah, so actually, oh, okay. I put up a project online, but I'm not going to like it that much. It's really, really cheap.
All right. So we left off. We have our to app. We can see our items. What we want to do now is we're going to be able to add an item. To be able to add an item, we need a form. So we're going to talk about Redux form. If you guys remember with inputs before, we had to use the component state, have some way to handle updating the state on every input change. You guys remember all that, right? So Redux form kind of helps us do all that through the Redux state, but without us directly having to handle it. It handles it for us. Redux form is definitely something optional. It's not necessarily something that every place is going to use. Some places may use it, some may not. And you do not have to use Redux form to use a form in Redux. It's just a nice library that's out there that helps you handle forms fairly easily. Also has really good error handling and stuff like that built into it. So you get a lot of nice functionality that you don't have to worry about building out. It's just a tool, not a necessity. Okay? So first thing we need to do is we left off on our list from server branch. So we need to add, commit, and push that, and then merge it to our master. So quick git status check. Looks about right. So let's say git add, git commit, completed, getting list from server. And then push. All right, and I'll just use the same trick again. We'll just copy this URL right here. It seemed to work fairly well. Use that URL to go to in our browser. Should take us to open a pull request for our list from server into master. And then whatever message you want to put here, make sure you're happy with it and it's understandable. And then we're going to create the pull request. Anybody need a second getting here still? All right, so we're going to create pull request. And we'll do a quick review of files changed. Looks good. So we'll jump back over to the conversation, merge the pull request, confirm merge, and delete the branch. Very good. All right, back over to the terminal. We'll switch back over to master, git checkout master, pull the master, git pull, and then delete the branch. Git branch dash lowercase d list from server. And then if the branch deleted successfully, everything is good. If it didn't delete, and you forgot to pull, or you didn't merge it all the way on GitHub, we have a few different things. Everyone all set? All right. So now what we'll do is we'll create a new branch. We'll say git checkout -b, and we'll say add -item. All right. In order to add an item, we're going to use Redux form. So in order to use Redux form, we have to install Redux form. So we'll say git npm install, a little off there, -- save Redux -form. And then let that do its thing. All right. While that's installing, we could go ahead and start doing some groundwork. Everybody got that command okay? Still need a second? Right here. All good? Everyone's good? Okay. All right. So if you're still installing, that's fine. I would imagine everybody's probably pretty much done by now, but if it's still going, it's all right. We're just going to do some setup before we use it anyways. So over in our folders, over in components, we'll make a new component. And we'll call it add_item.js. And this is one of those weird times where we don't need component state because we're using Redux form, so we don't need state to control the inputs. And we really don't need any lifecycle methods. So in all technicalities, we could use a functional component. Here's the thing, though. I already know we're going to need a couple custom methods. And yes, you can still define a function inside of a function. It's fine. But it's kind of messy. I'm not a huge fan of it. So because I know I'm going to need some added functionality with this component, I'm still going to go ahead and make it a class component, even though I don't need the direct functionality of the class component. Just for better organization, I'm going to use a class component. So that's kind of the third option of sometimes if you have a somewhat complex component that's going to need additional kind of like helper functions, or in this case, helper methods, you can still use a class component. You don't have to. I just prefer to. I really feel dirty when I declare a function inside of a function. Not that it's necessarily wrong, but anyways, we're going to make a class component. So React, curly brackets, component from React. And we'll say class, add item, extends component, render, return a div with an H1 with a class of center. Say add item. And then finally, we will export it. So, as always, just very basic structure, just enough that we can make sure our component's working. We're going to use routing, so we'll be able to test our routing, make sure all that's working before we dive into anything more complex with this component. Everyone good?
I'm not good.
Yep.
I have like pinball Jeff for a minute.
Okay. Charger. Ace.
I got it.
No, my screen keeps freezing.
You
Started in reactor.
We never saw the rhythm yet, so we got fading real.
All right, how we doing?
Okay.
All good? All right, so we have our little initial add item component. I'm going to jump over to app.js. And I'm going to import add item from add item. From this directory, add item file. I'm going to define a route for it. So route path equals, we just do add. We do add dash item. I think add's like nice and concise. Unless anybody has any objections. Excellent. So once you have this in, you can jump over to your browser, localhost 3000/add. So you have to manually right now type in the /add. We don't have any links or anything to get there otherwise. If you still need this for a second, I will come right back to it. I just want to test it. So localhost 3000/add. And you're going to notice it's kind of got that double header thing going on, which that's hideous. So we'll need to fix that. Okay. So when you go to /add, this is what you should see. And for anybody that still needs the code, there's the code. How's everybody doing? So far, so good? Problem? Okay, so you probably just forgot. So you stop this list right here. There you go. Oh yeah, we don't need that here.
Scott, can you do this real quick?
Yeah.
Looks like, what is it? Because that's what it's getting at.
Shit. Working, huh?
Oh, I didn't restart the service. So
So we can code the server on there. Okay, console.
I have this other one open, but I didn't know if I had to restart it.
But it should have a return statement. Oh, is that what it's pitching around?
Oh, I did render. I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Huh.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you.
It's weird that it highlighted so far back up.
Yeah.
Like that.
If
So
it was just that, I would have saw it.
yeah, if it would, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Very bizarre. All right. Are we good? All right. So I want to do a quick little cleanup. We want to take this H1, put it inside of our list. So I'm going to take this H1 right here, select the whole thing, cut it, get rid of some of this dead space. All right. So now all we have is a div with the class name container and our two routes. Our home route that displays our list, and then /add, which will be our add item form eventually. In the dark, this projector has a really good picture on it. So jump over to list.js. Right now, we're directly returning a UL, so we're going to kind of wrap this in a div. We're going to say div, move our UL and everything up inside of that div. Paste that. Oh, shit. I lost my H1 because I copied the. Should have pasted the H1 first. Oh, well. H1 dot center to do. And we'll change it to list anyways. To do list. Copy and pasting. And all I remember is the last thing you copied. All right, and then what we want to do inside of our list. So we wrapped our UL in a div, put our H1 here, and then up at the top, I'm going to import link. I say import curly brackets link from React router DOM. Okay. Is there something particular you need to see, or?
Yeah, can I see the? Actually, you're good there.
Okay.
Or just go down a little bit. Oh,
You guys got it figured out?
yeah.
Cool. All right, so at the top, we import link from React Router DOM. Make sure we use the curly brackets because it's a named export from React Router DOM. Kind of. And then between our H1 and our UL, we'll do a row. Inside of the row, we'll do a column that is S12 and right dash line. And inside of that, we'll do a link. So period row greater than period column, period S12, period right dash line, greater than link with a capital L. It'll build that. And then tab when you're ready. And then that'll put us, it should have put your cursor inside a link and we'll say add item. And then on the link, what we should have put class names on that, but I failed you as an instructor and gonna have to quit now.
No.
So on link, we're gonna do class name of button, and then any color you want. I was like, let's do like the blue gray. It's probably one of my favorites. Blue gray. Do like a darken of 1 on that. Let's get you guys to do any color you want. You don't have to copy my color. And we want this link to go to, where do we want it to go to? We want it to go to /add. Let's see what that looks like. Yay! All right, let's go back to the home page. Cool. Let me show our little add item button. It's beautiful. And then if we click it, it should take us to /add. We can see add item.
I still have to do
You probably did not delete it from app.js. Yeah. So you're just getting it in both places.
Can you go back to the list?
In helping you guys off on the last week or two, one thing I really noticed that some of you guys are missing, there is a add-on that will save you tons of typing called auto close tag. VS Code by default will auto close tags in HTML. They have yet to make it work for React and JSX. So you can install this if you just type auto close tag. It's like the first thing that comes up. Highly recommend installing that, and also auto rename tag. That way, when you're changing the name of an element, it'll change the opening and the closing tag. Very, very handy plugins. Just as a side note, because I noticed when helping a couple of you guys, you have to type out the opening and the closing tag. It doesn't generate it for you. A lot of extra typing to do. Plus, you're just asking for typos. I'm very impressed with the picture on that projector, especially standing this close to it. It's really good. Everybody good? We got the button showing up and the button works. See? See, senor. All right, so let's go back to work on our add item form. So add item. So we want to use Redux form. So of course, Redux form takes a little bit of setup. Nothing too terribly crazy, but it takes a little bit of setup. All right, so whenever you use Redux form, there's two main things you're going to import. Now, Redux form has a lot of other components and a lot of other stuff you can do, but most basic usage, there's two main things you're going to want to get. So I'm going to say import from Redux form. All right, those two things are field, which is pretty much used to generate an input. And then every Redux form has to use Redux form. Redux form is like connect. It is a higher order component. So it wraps around your component to give it all the Redux form functionality. Okay? And it works. The syntax for using Redux form, I was going to do that. So
That's right, I got it.
appreciate you doing that. Thank you. But the Redux form syntax looks just like connect. Now it's doing something completely different than what connect is doing. But the syntax looks very similar. Okay, so down at the bottom here, we'll delete add item, and we'll say Redux form. We're going to call Redux form, and we're going to pass it a config object. Redux form then returns a function, just like connect. So then we immediately invoke that return function, and we pass it our component. In this case, being add item. Okay, so very similar syntax. You'll see the longer you've been developing, the more and more you're going to start seeing patterns everywhere. Things start following very similar patterns. This is a very extreme case of that, of course, because, I mean, it's the first time you've seen it, you probably still see the pattern. But overall, in development in general, you'll see patterns and stuff, even between different languages. All right, so there's only one piece of configuration that every form must have, and that is form, and then some name for the form. You are naming the form right here. So this is where you're telling it how it's going to identify this form in the Redux state. Okay? We don't have to directly mess with the Redux state. We don't have to do anything with it, but we do have to give it a unique identifier for this form. In case you have multiple forms, especially multiple forms on the same page, you want some way to identify this particular form. So this one is called add item, because that's what I just made up. The reason I'm emphasizing this so much is because more often than not, everybody asks me, where did I get that item from? I just made it up. Okay? It could be anything. I know it's the same as like the class name. There's no relationship there. The form name can be whatever you want it to be. It could be the good old-fashioned fluffy bunnies if you want it to be. Okay? Doesn't matter. Whatever you put here, that is just now how Redux form will identify with this form. Okay, that's the only configuration that's required for this part. So that's it. It's not too terribly bad to set up. Now, there is one global thing that we did that we haven't done yet. And that's to plug Redux form into our Redux setup. Okay? It can't just magically work. So because it uses Redux, it uses a reducer as well. Just like how we have our reducers, Redux form has a reducer. And that's how it connects into our Redux state. So we have to plug their reducer into our reducers. So we do that inside of our reducer index file where we're creating our root reducer. So if we go to the reducers folder, index file, so this file, reducers folder, index file. Order does not matter. And if you're wondering why I do what I'm doing when I put stuff in certain orders, I like all the vendor imports to be at the top, and then all my stuff to be below the vendor imports. Vendor imports just mean they're coming from a node module. Okay? And once again, that's just me. There's no actual benefit to doing it that way other than my sanity, which I guess is a pretty big benefit. All right, so we're going to import curly brackets from Redux form. And they very cleverly named their reducer, which is a horrific name. So we're going to rename it. We're going to say as form reducer. Okay. I don't recall, but I don't think like their documentation tells you to rename it. This is me telling you to rename it. Okay. Reducer is a horrible name. And why this particular app is simple, and even your final project app probably won't have too many reducers in it. And in a large scale project, let me show you my reducers file on this project. Okay. So look at all these different reducers I have. If I had multiple reducers called reducer, it would get really confusing really fast. So you want to make sure stuff has a valuable name. So you can see even here, I'm using Redux form, and I did it reducer as form. And that's just so I can do it shorthand here, so I don't have to do everything equals to. But in a large project, I mean, there's just file. I mean, even my actions folder here, I don't have just like one actions file just because there's so many different. I have an actions file for every reducer. You don't have to do it that way, but when your project gets really large, it's just easier. So anyways, the point of all that is make sure stuff is named so you know what it is. And it's something as generic as reducer, it'll very easily get lost in the shuffle. All right, we have to set it on the property form, and we'll set that to our form reducer that we just imported. Okay, that's all the setup you have to do to plug it into Redux. Okay, that is it. Setup isn't too terribly bad. Once you've done that, now you can use Redux form anywhere in your app. So any component that's going to use Redux form, you then just have to do the little bit of setup we did here, where you use the Redux form higher order component, give it the configuration object, that returns a function, call that function, and pass it your component. All right, so now what we can do is we can add a form. Actually, we should probably do it in like a let's actually do like a row with a column inside of it of like S8 and then with a offset -S2. That way it's not the whole size of everything. And then in there, we'll do our form. And then our form is made up of fields. Fields are just essentially inputs. And you could do it fairly simply by doing, you could do like another for each input, you could do another freaking row. You guys don't copy this part because we're going to delete it. So we do another row, another column. Oh, got the period. Another column, S12. And then inside of that, put a field. Okay. And then for every input, we'd have to do that. Okay. And so you have to give your field a name. And we want it to be title. And you have to tell it what type of component to use. So if we just use a standard input, we could just tell it input as a string like that. Okay, and that will work. And then we could give it like a label up here. So if you're copying this, we're going to delete it in like 2 seconds. Not literally 2 seconds, but we'll say title. Okay, so, and if we have to do all of this multiple times, it's a lot of work. Okay, like it should look okay mostly. So it looks fine, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. And one of the things we're hoping to do with Redux form is create less work, not more work. Okay. So Redux form allows us, instead of just saying like input, we could actually pass it a function. Okay. So I'm going to delete everything inside my form, as I promised I would. All right, and I'm going to make up inside of my class here, I'm going to do a function called render input. And from render input, I'm going to return whatever I want each of my inputs to look like. So I do want it to be in a row. And inside that, I want S12. And then inside that, I want an input. Type text is fine for now. So that's pretty much the layout I want every input to look like. So now down in my form, I'll give you guys a minute. Oh, one thing I forgot up here is we want to do a label. Okay, so label here. I'll try and keep that on the screen. And then down here in the form, now I can just directly say, okay, I want to do a field. Give it a name. You have to give it a name. Field requires you to give it a name. If you don't, it'll give you a prop error saying like, hey, I need a name. Okay. And ultimately, the name is going to build the output of the form. And that output of the form, we're going to send directly to our server. So we want to make sure we name stuff properly. Our server is expecting 2 properties. If you guys remember, those 2 properties are title and details. Okay. The server wants us to send it an object that contains a property of title and a property of details. So if we name it here correctly, it'll help a lot so we don't have to worry about reshaping the object later. And then component equals, now we say equals curly brackets and this dot render input. And then we could easily make a bunch of fields. So we can make another one for our details. So field name equals details. Component. This dot render input. And you can just keep going on with that. And it makes your picking your inputs real easy. So kind of component that handles it for you. Now, we're going to run into some issues, of course. This can't be quite that simple. Wouldn't it be nice if that would just work like that? Just like, boom, everything works. So if we take a look at what it looks like in the browser, a couple things. We want to make sure our inputs are indeed showing up. We have no errors in the console. If you have any weird warnings, it's most likely probably okay, at least for the moment. But a couple problems. One, if we type and try and submit our form, A, we don't have a button, nothing's handling submitting. And I'm willing to bet us typing into these inputs probably isn't doing much good, but let's find out for sure. Does anybody need a minute to get to this point? I know I'm kind of speeding up a little bit. We'll run another time. This page?
Yeah. Okay. We're good.
So also notice the other thing is label here comes up twice. We probably want to be able to customize that, I would imagine. So we'll address that, but first let's address how the form gets submitted before we do anything else. So how the Redux Connect adds information to our props, and even the route adds information to our props. Redux Form adds a bunch of crap to our props. So if we console log out our props inside of the render method right here, so console.log add item props, this dot props. If we take a look at our props, we're going to see there's a whole bunch of crap on there now. And we're going to have all the stuff from the routing that got added onto this component, plus all the stuff from Redux Form that got added on. So you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff on here now. And then there's like our history from our router, location, and match. Those three things come from router, but pretty much everything else is from Redux Form. And if you go to wherever the H's are, right up here, there's a function called handle submit. That's probably a good indication of what it does. Handles the submit. So I'm going to use a little destructure. I'm going to say const curly brackets handle submit equals this dot props. All right, and then on our form, I'm going to say on submit equals curly brackets handle submit. Now we actually want to call this function, and when we call it, we want to pass it one of our functions as a callback. So I'm going to make another little method right up above render, and I'm going to say add item, or no, that'll be confusing. Send item to server. Or better yet, save item. Do that. Save item. And because I'm going to run into a binding issue eventually with this, I'm just going to say equals. And then I'm going to get all the values from the form when this is called. And I want to see those values. So I'm going to say console log form values. And then I'm going to jump back down to our form on submit, handle submit, and inside of handle submit, I'm going to pass it this dot save item. Now we're just passing save item in, we're not calling it. So we are calling handle submit, we're passing it save item. And then this will ultimately use our method and build a new function that it's going to return on submit that will get called every time the form is submitted. And in order to submit the form, we need to throw a button in here. And because I always like the button on the right, I'm going to say div. I guess it won't really matter if it floats. So I think we can just say div. I don't mean div dot right, because there's nothing below it. And this will run into issues when we add a second button. Let's not do that. So we're going to say row S12 row greater than. So inside a row we want S12. I'm falling apart at the end, guys. And we also want a class of right dash align. And then inside of that, we want a button with a class of button. And I'm going to stick with my blue dash gray and then darken dash 1. Tab. I hate it does that with the buttons. Why does it put it all in one line? Nobody got time for that? All right. And then on the button, we'll say add item. All right. If you're still typing on that, take a quick 2-second break while I test mine, and then I'll come back to this code. I'm going to go back to it, I promise. So if we type into our form, type, click add item, we'll get a console log of our form values, and we'll get an empty object. Okay, back to the code. The reason we're getting an empty object is because our inputs aren't connected to Redux form in any way, shape, or form. We're just rendering a div within a div that has an input in it. But that actual input is not connected to Redux form in any way. Okay? So when we submit the form, we get no data.
Is there a reason my button color is not right?
Yeah, it would just be the class name. Class name as well.
Okay. So it's like, so since it's off, it's taking it from the previous button I made.
Shouldn't no.
So
That's the default button color. That color
really?
there, that's the default color. Yeah.
So lighten is not a thing. It's only dark.
Yeah, but it's not red dash lighten. So red space and then lighten. Two.
Thank you.
Yep.
I see.
Yeah, they're separate classes. Cool. How are we doing? Are we good? So there's no way in hell we're gonna make it through all this, but I do want to be able to submit the values really quick. So if you spare me like 10 more minutes, we'll wrap this up. We'll come back to this on Friday. Okay. So when we pass our render input method into component, render input most likely is having some information passed to it. There's always a couple ways you can find out like what information is being passed to the callback function. 1, documentation. 2, under input arguments. And then we could use the keyword arguments. That will tell, oh, that was not spelled correctly. Arguments. Okay, arguments is a keyword in JavaScript, and it will tell you everything that's being passed into a function. Okay, it's an array of everything being passed in. Have you guys seen that yet? Some classes you get it gets shown to, and some for whatever reason it doesn't. But it's just a keyword in JavaScript. One thing about arguments, it does not work inside of a fat arrow function. I don't know why. I'm sure Tim probably does. I've never looked into the why behind that. But if you're ever trying to use arguments and it's not working, it's because you're in a fat arrow function. Either that or nothing's being passed in. So we can see everything being passed into this function. So let's take a quick gander at this and see what's being passed into render input. So it says there's two things being passed in. There's this first object that has input on it, and it has some what looks like kind of event listeners, right? On blur, on change. And then there's this meta information that looks like kind of a lot of information about that particular input. Is it dirty? Does it have an error? What form is it a part of? Is it invalid? Is it pristine? Has it been touched? Is it valid? Has it been visited? All kinds of useful stuff. Okay, more stuff than you could ever want to use. But you can check all these values, and we're actually going to do that a little bit when we get to error handling on Friday. But for now, the only thing we really care about is input up here. Okay, and it has all these event handlers on it, and it also has a value. Okay, so that's probably what the value of the input we care about. If you look, our render input arguments console log twice. Why did it console log twice? Yeah, one for each input. You're exactly correct. So we have two inputs, so that method ran twice. So the information with each one is unique to each input. Okay, so each input can have different information associated with it. So all we really care about is the first argument being passed in, which is our input in our meta object. And then I don't remember what the second one is, but apparently it's empty anyways. So, and what you'll most commonly see this called is props, because it's essentially the props being passed to the component. Okay, with that said, I'm going to change arguments just to props. So we have a function that takes in a single argument that returns JSX. Does anybody recognize that definition I just told you? What is that? A function takes in a single argument of props and returns JSX. Yeah, reach back to the first day I taught you guys React. That is the exact definition of a functional component, like to the letter. So this fits the description of a functional component, which means you could actually just make a component and do the same thing. Or you can do this as a method. React doesn't care. Okay? The deeper you get into React, it is mind-blowing what you can do with because of the way JSX works. And JSX just being objects. Components are just functions. You can do some really crazy, wild stuff. But this is just a component that we define as a method inside of the class. Mind blowing. All right. What we care about here, so I'm capturing the data that's being passed into render input now, and I'm console logging it. And you'll see it's the same information we were just looking at, except now it's just a little more refined. We have input and meta. All this input stuff here, once again, if we look at it, it has the name of the input, it has all the event handlers, and it has a value, which sounds like all the information that needs to be on our actual input, right? It has the value, it has our on-change stuff, it has the name of it. And if you think back to how we handled inputs when we did it ourselves before, We put a non-change on it. We had to directly set the value. We gave it a name. It's all the same stuff. So we need to get all this information onto our input element inside of our code. So we need to get all of props.input, all the stuff from that object onto input. And I think I already showed you guys the trick to do that. Instead of typing out every single prop and manually setting it, we could just do an object and say ... props.input. That will take that whole input object and explode it out onto our input and key value pairs. So that onChange that was inside of input will be onChange equals props.input.onChange. Value equals props.input.value, so on and so forth, all the way down the line. So every property that's in the input object will now get added onto our input here. And now, if we try type, now when we submit our form, you can see form values, and it has title and details. It actually has our form values. So while that seems like a lot, because this is the initial explanation of it, it's actually not that bad, because we define what each input should look like, and then we just use fields to create our inputs. We created a button to submit the form. We took handle submit from props, passed it our own custom callback function, and then inside of our custom callback, we have our values from our form that we can do whatever we want with. We don't have to worry about setting the state and like which input is being typed into. We don't have to do any of that crap. We have to do a little bit of setup. And like I said, the first time you see it, this might feel like it's a lot of setup, but it's actually quite a bit less setup than doing it yourself. Plus, what we don't have time to get into, but we will get into on Friday, is how awesome the air handling is and how easy the air handling is to set up. Okay? But we could already use our form as it stands. We could, call our server right here, pass it the data, and add an item. It would work. And we wouldn't need to do anything more than this. But we want to give our users feedback about the input they're giving us. So we will stop that here. And we'll, like I said, we'll pick up again with this on Friday. We're doing good as far as moving through the material, so we have plenty of time. If we get delayed a day, we're not going to be behind anything. So don't worry about if we go over a little bit. The memory match stuff kind of just threw us off a little bit, but we'll be okay. All right, and we'll come back to this with fresh minds on Friday. So I'm sure you guys don't have this all memorized quite yet. All right, any last minute questions? Everybody's pretty spent. In the back there, what's that?
Just stretching.
Just stretching? Gotcha. Guys, you don't gotta yell at me. Jeez. She's just stretching. Jesus, okay. Sorry. All right. Well, unless there's any more stretching, I think we'll call it. And we'll pick back up on Friday. I would add a commit. We're still going to work off this branch. We're not done here yet. But whenever you stop for the day, even really when you stop for like a lunch break, bathroom break, I've been really bad with you guys about it. It depends. Some courses I remember, some I don't, because I'm bad about it in general. But whenever you walk away from your desk, or even when you complete a small task on a branch, even if you're not ready to change branches, you should always add commit and push, because that guarantees your work is saved up somewhere other than your computer. If you get up and walk away and your person sitting next to you spills their 40 ounces of coffee onto your computer, you don't want to lose all the work you just did for the last couple hours. Okay? So you should always, whenever you're taking a break, completing small tasks, always add commit and push. Plus, you get more green dots. And we all know that's why we're all really here, is to collect green dots on GitHub. So do a quick git status check, make sure nothing crazy is happening. Excellent. Oh, that's because I'm on the part-time site. Wrong place. Good thing I did git status, huh? So app list index add item looks legit. Git add commit -m add item form in progress. And then I'll go ahead and push it, make sure it gets saved. And when you do commits like today, like let's say we have a couple commits on our add item, but we haven't merged it to our master yet, so you won't see your green dots for these commits until Friday when we merge add item to master. Then you'll see your green dots, and they'll even appear on today. But they won't. You don't get credit for commits until it's merged into the main branch of the repo. Usually the master branch, but it doesn't have to be. You can actually change what the main branch of a repo is. By default, it's master, so if you didn't change it, it's going to be the master branch. But you'll notice that too when you're working on your final projects. Like you might be merging everything to a dev branch, so you won't necessarily see your green dots show up for it. But eventually that dev branch is going to get merged to master, and then all those dots will show up. Okay. Plus, when you merge pull requests, if you review a pull request, all that stuff gives you dots. And that's how they claim it works, and that's how it mostly works, but it does do some weird things. You don't get random weird green dots, which, hell, I'll take free green dots. So. All right, everybody get their branch saved, pushed. I'll see you guys on Friday. I'll be here tomorrow, but don't talk to me. Totally kidding. I am working on for my final project group. I'm building an accordion in React. It's almost done. I will share it with the whole class just so you guys can see how it's done. Sorry. But the point being, if there's any particular little widget type thing that you guys, any of the other groups need help building in React, maybe a modal, whatever, let me know. I'm more than happy to show you guys an example. I might already have an example, but if not, I'll build one for you guys. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
That's very welcome.
Do you have an example for Wizard too?
For a wizard,
Uh-huh.
like a wizard form, where it goes between multiple forms.
Yeah.
I do not. I could make one, but that'll take a little bit more time.
Hey, Scott.
Request.
Also, what about like React Native? How similar? Like I see a bunch of components of that. Totally different.
Yes,
Okay.
because it's for it's for native apps. It's a whole different. There's a lot of things out there that's gonna be like, oh, it's like the exact same thing, and it converts really easily. You still have to know what you're doing in whatever, for mobile development. Like you still have to have some kind of base knowledge. You can't just like, I know React, I can make native apps. You'll see a lot of tutorials and documentation or articles that say otherwise. They're lying to you.